My dear friends, my brothers and sisters, do you watch much television? I would tell you, you flip around the stations, there's nothing to watch. Every station has food shows on it, right? Did you see Holy and Hungry on the Food Network? Did you see St. Athanasius? The only thing about that show is it didn't have me on it. It had a Father Leo. I don't know where he came from. But that was one. You watch now, you see all about The View. The View, who's back? Joy Behar. Everybody thinks Joy Behar is Jewish, right? She's not Jewish. She's Italian. You know what her name is? Her real name? Josephine Acuto. How do I know that? I buried her mother. I buried her father. I buried her aunt. She comes from Our Lady of Mount Carmel. She grew up on Metropolitan Avenue, and they called it In the Flats at that time. And you know Joy Behar, the rest of the Joy Behar story? She went on TV on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire years and years ago when Regis was the host. Do you remember that? And she won from my school when I was in Mount Carmel $125,000. And we used that for tuition assistance. Now, the advertisements all week. What was the show advertised all week? Front page cover of the Daily News, the Stephen Colbert Show. Did you see that? I stayed up the first night to watch, and about 11:30 when it started, 11:35, I fell asleep. And Stephen Colbert watched me. But it's interesting, he's had all these big shots on the show. Have you been watching? He had Vice President Biden on. And I figured, I tried to stay up and watch it, I figured Biden is going to say he's going to run. And I was hoping he would say that, because we need somebody to run against Hillary. But that's politics. Keep it out, keep it out. I know. That's dangerous. That's dangerous, all right? So he was on. And what did Biden talk about? Anybody watch it? One, he talked about his Catholic faith. Did you see that? It was absolutely amazing. The Vice President of the United States talked about his Catholic faith. And everybody knows he just lost his son. But he also suffered many other tragedies in his life. And did you hear his story of his faith? He said, first of all, somebody just told me, he said he says the rosary every day. Two, he said he goes to Mass and he feels this kind of aloneness with God. Not that he's alone in the congregation, but he feels a certain aloneness, being with God in kind of a communication, a connection. And then he talked about suffering. He talked about his personal loss, his personal sufferings. And in the talking about his personal loss and sufferings, he said, what was his consolation? What was his consolation? His faith. He went to a place in his faith and found consolation in all the sufferings that he went through. I thought that was very remarkable. And I got to be honest with you, he talking about his faith kind of made me want to talk more or listen more to that man. My brothers and sisters, the gospel talks about suffering. What does Jesus say to Peter? What does Jesus say? He says, go to hell. Get behind me, Satan. What is he saying? You know, Peter, go to hell. Because Peter didn't want to hear anything about suffering. He wanted to hear that everything's going to be rosy, everything's going to be wonderful, we're going to be very influential people. And what did he say? Go to hell, Peter, because you know what? I have to go on that cross, and I have to suffer, and I have to die. Peter didn't want to hear it. He wanted to stuff his ears. And Jesus puts him clearly in this place. My brothers and sisters, think about it. Everybody has some suffering in this church. Do they not? Look at even the kids. Even the kids have suffering. You know what suffering was for the kids? Tuesday night, 9 o'clock, their parents said to them, go to bed. Why? I stay up to 11 now. It's the summer. School starts tomorrow. Even these young people, right, Peter, have suffering. They got to go back to school. You think they were happy about that on Tuesday night? Forget about it. My brothers and sisters, suffering. The other day, I had a funeral of a police officer, 42 years old. I went to St. Rose of Lima Church in Massapequa in that terrible, terrible deluge. And if you noticed, did you see, where did they get the heaviest rains on Long Island? Massapequa. I was there. I can attest to it. And we were at the funeral, and it's a very sad story. A 42-year-old cop, Michael Urbano. What happened to him? He went on the job at 35. Just 2 years ago, he was diagnosed with cancer. He had his leg amputated. And then the cancer went to his lungs, and he died. The mother of that cop was in tears, but she turned and she held on to the cross when it was given to her at the end, and she held that cross and knew that Christ was with her in her suffering. The Lord is there. Biden said it. In the cross comes the suffering, comes the consolation of faith. 9/11. 9/11 was Friday. And let me tell you, I always go down to 9/11 saying, oh, I'll be fine this year. It's 14 years. And you stand there, and you see the flag come out, tattered and burnt, with holes in it. And when you stand there and look at that flag, all of a sudden, the memory of that day comes in, and you get very emotional. I'm standing there with the other chaplains. A woman comes over to me and says, Father, she didn't know I was a Monsignor. Said, Father, I didn't have my label on. And she comes over to me and she says to me, could you come and bless my 8-month-old grandchild? We're standing in front of his grandfather's name plaque. Of course I did. I went over, blessed the family, talked to them a few minutes, said a prayer. They found some consolation in their faith by praying together. The mother was crying, and I look at the name, and it says Peter Milano. I said to them, where do you live? Oh, New Jersey. I said, do you have relatives in Brooklyn? Everybody has a relative in Brooklyn. And I said, do you have relatives in Brooklyn? I said, yes. We grew up in Brooklyn. It was the kid that lived on the corner of my block, East 95th Street and Foster Avenue, Peter Milano. And I said to myself, isn't it ironic how God puts people together in suffering, and how God is there in our sufferings? My brothers and sisters, indeed, everyone here has a suffering. Where do we need to go? Where do we need to go? We need to go to our faith, because the Lord Jesus holds his hand out to all of us in suffering. What did the vice president say? I go to my faith for consolation.